All right, guys, we are now live streaming on our monthly YouTube show, Alabama Work Comp Today. Hey, Dave, how's your afternoon going there, bud?
Going great. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad that you're here, and I'm also glad that we've got our buddy Judson Pierce from up in the Boston or Salem, Massachusetts area. It's good to see you, bud. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely, our pleasure. And this is for us work comp nerds. This is our favorite show of the month, where we get to talk work comp for almost an hour with one of our buddies, one of our colleagues in different parts of the country. We try to compare notes. We talk about what's going on in our world, what's going on around the world or the country at least, and from employers, employees, and independent contractors standpoint. So we've got a bunch of stories to go through today. But before we do, Judd, tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice, and then we'll get going.
Well, thank you again. I'm a lawyer up in Salem, Massachusetts, known for those famous trials in 1692. Still living that identity today, but that's another story. I've been up there now at that law firm, Pierce, Napolitano, for 21 years. I can't believe it's been that long. But I graduated from law school in Boston and did a little defense work for a few years. Did not like that at all. So I had to go back to my roots, and my roots were growing up with my father, who has been doing comp law for decades, and really an amazing guy, amazing mentor, Alan Pierce. And the lawyer had just left his firm in '99, and I joined up and been there ever since. We're 5 lawyers, and we have 5 support staff. And we concentrate at least in workers' comp, state workers' comp law.
Excellent. Well, very good. Well, Dave, I can't remember who knew the Pierces first, me or you, or how it was. Do you remember some of that?
I think I remember meeting Alan. He was the first president of WILG when I joined the organization. So that was about 6 years ago. Is that about when he was president of the organization? Yeah. So that was 5 or 6 years ago.
Wow. Yeah, he's past president now.
Yeah.
All the honor and glory and none of the hard work like Malcolm's doing right now for us. WILG's been an amazing organization. I've been a part of it really since his year as president, a little bit before that, but mostly concentrating since then, and just wanted to stay active and meet all you folks from around the country. It's fascinating, and it's really helpful for our practice.
Yeah, and it's allowed lawyers from all over the country to meet each other. Like, how else would we know you and your dad but through this organization? So it's made the country smaller for us, and it's great getting to know lawyers from around the country and be able to refer cases to people that we know are specialists in that area, so that our clients are getting good representation from lawyers that specialize in those particular areas of law.
You know, you're exactly right, Dave. We've been doing this for, I think, 15 months. We've been doing this. We've had guests on from literally all over the country. And that's what's been cool about being members of our organization of WILG. I think almost every episode where we've had guests, they've been fellow members. And it really does shrink the country, as you just said. And I think that makes it pretty cool to be able to compare notes or maybe commiserate as we do in Alabama compared to some of the other states, and what the way their laws probably are a little bit better or a lot better than the ones they are in Alabama. But Judd, thank you for making some time for us today. We're going to hit the articles in just a minute or two, but I did want to say hello to Dennis Mosley, who's watching us. Thank you, Dennis. If you or anybody else who's watching us live or later on have questions that you want to ask about any of these articles or about work comp as a whole, just feel free to throw it into the chat section, and I'll be able to field those and send them out to talk about them with Judd and David. And why don't we figure out where our first article is today, and we will get started. Let's see, the title of this one is "Nobody Sees Us. testing and lab workers strained under the demands. And we are now, what, 9 months, heading on 10 months into the dreaded P word, the pandemic. Thankfully, the news is showing that the vaccine is not only the vaccines, the different companies, is here, but it's starting to be rolling out and administered. I think it's a 4-phase rollout. Frontline workers, medical workers, I've already seen in Birmingham have started getting them. I saw where some veterans at our local VA hospital were receiving them. And so that's very encouraging. Judd, I'm sure you've had similar news in your area, but these folks who are testing millions upon millions of tests every day, that's got to be some real strain, some real pressure.
Yeah, the hidden heroes, really. We're recognizing the frontline workers, and we should, the nurses and doctors, people who are caring for us, and those pathologists and the technicians behind the scenes are really working like they've never worked before. And not in addition to the regular tests they're performing all these extra, PCR tests. And there are different types of PCR tests, and it involves a lot of skill. I think you need an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree to be a technician, but there's a scarcity of them. Every hospital needs at least one, and they work 24/7 at different hospitals. As work comp practitioners, I think we're going to see some repetitive stress injuries like the article talks about. We're going to see some real stress injuries too, like maybe overnight workers, people who are just totally stressed to the max. So it's a very, very interesting area that we're heading down in terms of testing. And I just want to put a shout out for Dr. Michael Mina, who I follow on Twitter, who's a Harvard pathologist, and he writes a lot about the testing issues that we're facing as a country and how vital it is to get, cost-effective, easy testing in people's homes that people can run themselves, almost like a pregnancy test. And once we get that going and invest some money in that, we're going to take a lot of the burden off the shoulders of these technicians.
David, let me ask you a little side note from this article. What about these lab technicians or these workers in labs who get exposed and then are diagnosed with COVID? Are they going to be covered under work comp coverages? I don't think we've seen one of those cases in our practice yet. What about you, Judd? You had anything similar to this?
We haven't yet. I think that the burden of proof and causation element will be tough. I think it's got to be particular to the employment in Massachusetts. In a hospital setting, sure, I think it would be a little bit of a easier case to make out. I was talking to a doctor, a pulmonologist at Stanford Hospital just today about testing, what he's been doing in terms of caring for folks. He says the concern for his hospital isn't that they're going to catch COVID. It's just that they're going to burn out really fast, stressed out and overworked, and constantly with the vials and the testing things with their hands and wrists, get the carpal tunnel going. But I think improving causality will be a big challenge in these COVID cases going forward.
Yeah. Dave, any additional thoughts on that very topic?
It sort of depends, and Judd's absolutely right. And then it also depends on the particular state where the worker was exposed, and whether that state has a presumption that they were exposed at work. Certain healthcare workers and frontline workers who contract the virus, well, it's presumed that they received it at work or got it at work, and so they will be covered. But as Judd mentioned, if there's a causation issue, meaning you could have gotten it anywhere, then it's going to be much harder for them to prove a work comp case. The article states that 193 million tests for coronavirus have been processed nationwide, with millions more to go. So, these technicians, they're handling hundreds and hundreds of tests or vials each day. And it's just, they're working very hard. They're being overworked to do what they got to do to get these test results back to doctors and people.
Yeah.
You know, a good thing is the test was just approved, the Australian test that runs like the fast pregnancy test. So that was just approved yesterday for use in America. So that is hopefully going to help out.
That's great.
Hopefully we're going to go from crawling to walking to sprinting pretty soon with getting these things done. But on a side note, not to make light of this, but what percentage of those 193 million tests you think have been processed on SEC football players in the last 5 months? Probably a pretty large percentage. But let's move on to our second article, guys. This one is entitled Addressing Safety Workers' Comp Issues for a Remote Workforce. And this, I think, in our little world of work comp, is got to be the hottest topic besides the issue that we just talked about the exposure and whether there's causation. Because with so many people working from outside of the traditional brick and mortar offices, when you're working remotely, you're telecommuting. And Dave and I just gave a paper summarizing all the cases that have been reported in the last 20 years or so about this issue. But Judd, let me start with you. Have you seen any of these cases come across your desk in the last 6 to 8 months?
We've seen working from home type cases, telecommuting for years now. My father handled at an appeal an interesting case in 2008 where a guy, tennis coach, had to report the scores to the local newspaper by 9 p.m. after a match. And he didn't do it from school. He'd regularly go home, have his dinner, and before 9 p.m. call in those scores. Well, he fell down the stairs as he was going to do just that. And the insurer defended on the grounds that he wasn't compelled to do it from home. But fortunately, I think the reviewing board, our appeals court for Department of Industrial Accidents cases, found otherwise and said that, he was in the course of his employment and even in the scope of his employment, rising out of and in the scope of employment. And I think we're going to see a lot more of them this year because of, it's skyrocketed. The article says that there were a certain amount of people, millions of people working from home. And then it's going to be over 50%, I think, this year.
I really think it's if it's not, it's heading there in a hurry. And Dave, remind me, what was the three most common topics, the three most common threads of these types of cases? One was dogs.
Judd, it doesn't surprise me to hear that your dad's case involves stairs. I think there's been 9 or 10 appellate cases, telecommuting cases since 2000 nationwide. And 6 of the 9 involved either ice, stairs, or the family pet. So falling downstairs, tripping over the family dog, or slipping on ice in the driveway. Or the sidewalk.
But all of them, you hit the nail on the head, Judd, in the course of, in the scope of doing the job was one of the factors that all of these decision-making courts had to address, whether it was a dedicated space like a room in the house, or if they kept, for example, inventory or supplies in the garage, or they even worked out of their car. That was a theme for all of those. And I can only imagine that those types of cases are just going to explode over the next, if they hadn't already started, they're going to now.
Are you furthering the employer's interests at all? That's a huge test.
That's right. Yeah, the where you were when it happened is somewhat of a red herring. That as for a reason for denial or argued by a defense counsel. That's just not as important in 2020.
Yeah, so this is going to be a topic, I think, that's going to be a reoccurring theme on our show going into 2021 and beyond, about these telecommuting type cases. But that'll shift us into 2021, and our third article that I really think is got to be on the minds of any and all business owners, whether you're a law firm, a restaurant, it doesn't matter what you do. Doing business in 2021, I think we can all agree, is going to look vastly different than it did in 2019. If 2020 is the year of shifting and pivoting your business so you can not only survive, but hopefully thrive, hopefully by now or getting into 2021, you're finding your footing. And I know I'm talking kind of in the general abstract, but this article came from an online magazine called Human Resource Executive, but I think the title of this is so spot on. 3 issues remote or first companies need to think about in 2021. And it just came out yesterday, in fact, or today. And Dave, what did you take away from this, from the article that is addressing?
Well, as the owner of a small business, I do consider myself somewhat of an HR executive. Bernard, I guess you are too. Judd, I don't know if you're the managing partner of one of your partners is the HR executive for your firm. But it was interesting. And, what we have to do is just rethink a lot of the things that we used to do. And for instance, the article talks about some of the perks or benefits that our employees get that are physically located in the office, or benefits like gym membership. Well, we gotta rethink those kind of things. We don't have the big office lunch anymore in the office, right? We don't have the buffet lunch in the office where everything's individually wrapped, or you sit at your desk, that type of thing. So, we just got to be creative when it comes to these employee benefits and perks.
What about you, Judd? Was there anything that really stood out from this article that either you're going to have to incorporate into y'all's practice or firm, or that maybe you're on the lookout from potential new clients who may have cases or issues to talk about?
Well, we had to pivot. I guess that was the magic word this year. And we worked from home from March until June. Governor Baker, a Republican governor of Massachusetts, said that employers could have 25% of the workforce back in their offices. Since we're a small firm, that meant about 3 of us at any one time. We do it in shifts, right? We work mostly from home, but maybe we'd come into the office every day or every other day, work a few hours and go home. What was important for us and what really kept us together this year was that either weekly meeting or sometimes 2 times a week, usually in the morning, where we would all Zoom together. We got pretty good at that quickly. And, just talk about what's going on, like how the office and what needs to be done on certain cases that are really ripe and pending, and just also catching up on our daily lives and how we're doing with our families and getting through all this together. That was huge. And I think that, it's mentioned in the article for good reason. If you can keep that, especially in the smaller firms, larger firms probably to some degree too, maybe they'd have to departmentalize a little bit more. But we all got on the Zoom together and it was great.
Well, that's what you just mentioned, and I'm going to let David elaborate a little bit, is all law firms have had to learn how to do business in a different way. And whether that meant going to all virtual or telecommuting or whatever you want to call it. But Dave, share a little bit about our experience and how we, again, I hate to overuse the word pivot, but that's really what you have to do to survive that March, April, May, June, when everybody's, the whole world's practicing law with their hair on fire, so to speak. And then things started calming down a little bit later in the summer. And I think we've kind of found our groove at this point. But Dave, share a little bit of that experience and what we were able to do.
Well, when we've given CLEs or before and talked about running a law firm efficiently, one of the things we talk about is you have to evolve or you're going to die, right? Or as Billy Bean said in Moneyball, adapt or die.
Yeah.
Shout out to Ben Gerber in Georgia, who loves that movie as much as I did.
And he may be watching us, so if you are, Ben, good to see you.
Ben and I just talked about that. We just talked about the other day.
Yeah.
Adapt or die, and that's been our approach for years. And I think that being a 6-person law firm, and Judd, you having a 10-person law firm, we're smaller, but we're nimble. We can change. We can adapt quicker, evolve quicker than a bigger, larger firm or a bigger, larger business. But to your point, Judd, it's all about communication. You've got to communicate no matter whether you're all in the office or you're all working remotely. And we implemented from the first, back in March, monthly Zoom calls. We just did we were already having weekly firm meetings in person, but then we went to weekly virtual, and we've continued those. So no matter where your employees are, you just got to communicate. And then we've been doing that on Zoom, just like you guys have.
That's great.
And it's, I guess, because of the type of practice we have, bench trials, not jury trials. We're actually, Judd, you may or may not know, we, I think, are the only state in the country that still has a litigation-based circuit judge as our trier of fact approach to cases. We don't have tribunals or administrative processes for most of things. If we want to resolve our differences, now I will say this, the Department of Labor through the Ombudsman program does have a medical mediation process. I don't know if I've ever used it. We pursue everything through the court system. So our courts, once they got back to running and were able to handle things, Zoom or whatever online process, they've allowed us to have hearings. There have been some trials, and our courts are starting to open up where you can now have in-person hearings and so forth. But that was one of the things that I was very proud that we were already a little ahead of the game technology-wise. As David said, we've been adapting quite frequently, just getting rid of your paper files, not having a warehouse full of all of that, having to pay for all of that. Nothing burned me up more than paying for my paper to be stored off-site. We got rid of that several years ago.
Yep, totally agree up here too.
So just things like that. And I don't know if I've met in person with a client to sign them as a client in 8 months, 9 months. We have a couple online times. They can sign with their finger on DocuSign or one of those.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
We were using that before the pandemic, Judd, and we have been just overusing it since. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, we have to get that or look into getting that, because right now they're signing and taking a picture of it and scanning it and emailing it to me. I'd much rather them have the ease of doing that on screen or with a mouse.
The conversion rate is through the roof. It's fantastic.
It's really
easy. It's so easy. Yeah.
Good for you guys for starting that early.
That process, plus Judd, instead of, we opened our eyes very quickly. Mobile, Alabama is one of the furthest drives for us. It's almost 300 miles.
Wow. And
the long and the short of it is David had a hearing at 8:15 one morning for a settlement of a work comp case, which takes 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes tops. But he was able to do it in Birmingham from his home or here at the office, as opposed to that 8-hour round trip day of driving all the way down there. So technology is our best friend when it comes to stuff like that. So that's some of the things we're hoping that stay in place continue for the practice of law. It's so much more efficient. Now, our brethren on the defense side of things would not
at all agree with that. No.
So hopefully there'll be a happy compromise somewhere in there.
Give and take. Yep. Symbiotic relationship.
That's right. That's right. Well, guys, we're probably about halfway through our show, and I want to welcome those who are watching us live or may watch us later on the recording. We've got Judson Pierce with Pierce and
Napolitano.
Oh, I knew I was going to mess it up, and I apologize for that. But up in Salem, Massachusetts, Judd and his dad, Alan, have an active podcast. I've been fortunate to be a guest on a while back. And if you haven't, I think it's called, is it Work Comp Matters?
It is.
And it's
a Legal Talk Network.
And it may be one of the longest work comp podcasts, I think, that's there. So please try to find that. Great guests, me excluded, but great subjects all the time, each month. But what we're talking about here on Alabama Work Comp Today with Judd is 3 or 4 or 5 articles that have been in the news in the last couple of months that we hope have a broad interest, regardless of where you are in the country. We try not to get too Alabama focused at times, but even if we do address some Alabama-based subjects, it probably would apply in Massachusetts or Georgia or Wyoming or wherever else in the country, at least on some level. So we want to thank you, Judd, for spending some time thus far with us before we head into our next article. All right, let's see. This one's different, but this is a broad article that could be addressed on a number of different types of shows. And there's an example from this week down in the South that I'll get to. But the name of this one is Virus Cases in College Sports Prove Athletes Are Workers, and they should be treated as such. Before we dive into this, Judd, do you have any initial thoughts or opinions on this topic?
You know, Boston's a sports town, guys. We love our sports. Over the last, my kids are 16 and 13. They don't know a season without a championship. Can you believe that? Not to rub it in, but we don't have the college sports like you guys do. Mm-hmm. That is something we rely on to watch, and we watch with glee and entertainment. We wanted to see these sports start up again this year, but conflicted, right? Conflicted not only because concussions have been in the mix for a long time, and you had a great show on concussions recently.
We do.
But with COVID now, you're putting these athletes, these young men and women, in such harm's way when more than half the student body aren't even on campus. And the girls who had to go from Stanford to Vegas, and Vegas was a higher rate of COVID I mean, insane, right? So, I mean, this goes back years. Should athletes be rewarded, compensated in some way for what they give these schools? I mean, I have to say, I don't know how you feel because you know your colleges, you Roll Tide, all that, but I have to think that they should be getting remunerated. You know, people are making so much money off these kids and telling them, "Oh, don't worry about it." You know, I don't know. It's scary. Scary, guys.
The name, image, and likeness laws that are being pushed forward are going to address a lot of that. Dave, I know you want to chime in with Alabama and the championships, but we'll pause that for just a minute. What I want you to address.
No, this season, SEC championship game Saturday, what?
All right, go ahead, get it out.
That's it. Go ahead.
What I want you to address, because I know we've chatted about this a bunch, and forgive me because I can't remember the young man's name who is the preseason Southeastern Conference potential player of the year from Florida in basketball.
Yeah.
This past summer, he was exposed and was positive with COVID, developed a heart condition of some sort, and this past weekend fell out on the court and had to be rushed to the emergency room, put into a medically induced coma. And thankfully, the last reports that I've read is he's now communicative and seems to be on the better side of things. But what remains to be seen is his career on hold? Is it over? Or is he going to be cleared eventually? And I think a lot of that remains to be seen about how his body responds to all of the condition that he's dealing with. So here's my question, Dave. Who pays for all those bills? Who pays for anything related to this from a cost standpoint? Does he get to finish school for the semester? So many questions are here. Do you got any
Yeah,
thoughts on these
I don't
things?
know if he's covered under, would that be covered under his parents' health insurance, or does the school provide medical coverage? Because I believe he was on the court in the middle of a game during a timeout when he collapsed. And then if he's not able to play basketball, does he, will his scholarship be available to him until he graduates? I don't know.
Unlike a football player who tears up a knee in the middle of a play on national TV, we can fairly say that that's going to be covered by the school.
Mm-hmm.
We can fairly say that. He's not going to be compensated like you would an employee for being off. But Judd, we're not talking about watching somebody in the course of making a play, blowing out, having an orthopedic injury. We're talking about a basketball player doing his sport for his school and then falling out. I would almost equate it, a truck driver who may have heat stroke or have a heart condition. In those cases, I know from our experience, those are tough cases to prove. What do you think happens here? I know that we don't have a crystal ball, but how does this play out?
Well, maybe there's a statewide initiative to pool money together in terms of a fund. When we had our Boston Marathon explosion in 2013, a lot of people had lasting injuries who were not, they weren't seen or visible. I mean, injuries. These were traumatic brain injury type things. And we had a Boston Strong Fund that came together, and a lot of people contributed, private, public sector, and these monies were made available for those folks. And there were hundreds of thousands of them who were afflicted with lasting injuries. And with COVID, we know that there's a long haul syndrome, and some people might be afflicted with this long haul stuff for who knows how long. We just don't know yet. Cam Newton, our quarterback now, unfortunately, he had COVID earlier on in the season. He came back a game or two later and he was foggy. Everyone said that there was just something off with him, and it wasn't just his bad arm not being able to make a throw. It was just, he was COVID still feeling the after effects. So I think there's got to be some sort of public-private partnership with pool money and fund for all these kids who are similarly found situated with this.
Let me throw this to you, David. Let's say that I'm a parent and my child has this happen. And I know that, and I'm going to use the Southeastern Conference as my example because that's where we live. I know that each of the colleges in the Southeastern Conference get large 8-figure checks every year from being a conference member. I'm questioning my athletics director. Why isn't some of that money being put aside to take care of our athletes who are not only with the orthopedic issues, but with the COVID-related issues? And I suspect that these are conversations that are going on behind closed doors with board of directors, trustees, whatever the colleges or universities call their governing bodies, with these athletic directors. Because if I'm a parent, I'm entrusting my child to play and represent your school. How are you going to take care of them?
And we just don't know the long-term effects that this virus is going to have on us, especially internally. And it's frightening. Yeah, it's frightening. It's an honor to go play, get a scholarship and go play for the school. But serious injury, long-term illness. It's hate it for these kids.
Well, Judd, here's another thing that you may be aware of. If you're hurt playing your sport, let's say I'm a football player and I'm a lineman and I blow out my back, and you're on scholarship, the NCAA has provisions where they can move you off of what I'll call the active scholarship roster of 85 or whatever the current numbers are, to what is called a medical scholarship, where you're no longer on the active list, you're on the inactive list. if that basketball player can never play again, what's more important to him? His pro prospects or getting that education and working in some capacity, some way, with or without a degree? And again, if the university hopefully will step up, and again, we don't know what's going to happen. Hopefully he does get back to his sport and is in fine health. I'm looking at the worst case scenario here. Does the university put him on that medical scholarship and keep him so he can complete his degree? I would certainly hope so.
Yeah, I think they owe a duty, right? There's definitely a power relationship there that sort of, outwardly one-sided. And, we're talking about a kid's long-term job prospects and education at that university, college be paramount, right? You just don't want them to, be without any career that they thought they were going to have and not have the benefits of an education because they can't pay or afford to go there anymore. And bravo with Vanderbilt and Sarah Fuller this year. What an amazing story that was.
Yeah, it was a great story. I saw news today. She got her degree. She's now transferring to North Texas to get a graduate degree. Whether she's going to play, I think she's going to play soccer for North Texas.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. But that in an otherwise terrible
bright spot.
That was definitely a bright spot. But that's, college sports are so very important, and they have been for decades. And there's so much money at stake. Not taking care of the athletes who provide that sport, who represent your university, not providing for them is a crime.
Guys,
Right?
I went to Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, New York, which was formerly an all-women's higher education institution. They let in guys. Fortunately, that's how I got in. And I wasn't much of an athlete. They're not known for their sports. Their football team's undefeated since 1869.
That's very impressive.
But squash was the big sport there. And I wonder how many injuries happen in squash. Do you guys know? I have no idea. I would think a lot. Those balls are small but mighty strong when they come back at you.
I haven't seen the research on that, but I'm gonna look into that.
Well,
Bernard, does this mean that Sarah Fuller is not going to be playing in Vanderbilt's bowl game?
Correct.
Okay.
I don't think Vanderbilt's going to be playing in Vanderbilt's bowl game.
Oh.
In fact, their game against Georgia was canceled for this weekend, so the season's effectively has concluded. And Judd, getting back to squash, we may have to have you as a special guest to come back next month. We'll bump somebody just to revisit the squash injury.
I'm going to research
dynamics. Please do. Well, guys, what I want to transition to for the last part of our talks here is Dave and I like to, and this is where we really nerd out, guys, so be prepared. We want to make a comparison of Alabama law and procedures on work comp related issues with the home state of our guest, Massachusetts. Now, one thing that is probably not unique to any part of the country is how slow the mail is, the Postal Service is, and has been for a while. With people not being in person, the Postal Service and all of those delivery related companies and organizations have been stretched to the max. But the results have been, by and large, delays. So where does this come in? Where does this impact our practice, Dave, and how do we deal with it?
Yeah. So we've had a significant increase in calls from clients this month asking the status of their temporary total disability check. That's the check they receive from work comp while they're off work getting medical care. And usually they're paid on either a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis or bi-monthly basis. In Alabama, unfortunately, those checks are not late and there's no penalty due unless the check is more than 30 days late from when it should be received. And once work comp places the check in the mail, it's kind of out of their hands. And so few of these work comp carriers offer direct deposit. So many clients are just waiting by the mailbox every day, and these checks are arriving later and later each time, putting more financial strain on the injured worker.
Judd, have you found a similar experience with some of your clients dealing with this issue?
It's almost identical, guys. We're getting calls a lot now with clients who are saying, it's more than 2 weeks, Judd, and that's our threshold. But the penalty is so insignificant. I mean, it's $200. It's been set in stone for 30 years.
Wow.
We got to change our laws. I know you guys date back to the 80s with your last overhaul. We're early 90s. And, our legislature doesn't want to move. It doesn't want to move. It doesn't see the urgency. And so we as an organization, WILG, is really strong about talking about constitutional law challenges and making the playing field a little bit more level, right? Right now, it's just out of control. And the adjusters, they don't feel it. They're working from home. Maybe they forget to put rep pay in, push that button to set up rep pay for 6 more months. And my client's really, really struggling. So it keeps us up.
It does. Go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say, you guys, Massachusetts, you got 18 inches of snow on the ground. I can see that somewhat of a delay being caused by that. We don't. We're just got some cold weather down here. I guess it's just the volume of mail that's in
deliveries, packages, yeah.
And with our clients being paycheck to paycheck, typically on an hourly pay, it's crucial they get their money on time to pay those bills, keep those lights on.
Why is it that direct deposit isn't a thing with every insurance carrier?
We have been begging for a decade with people who we deal with, and deaf ears.
Yeah, and I know that many adjusters want that, and they have made that suggestion to the higher ups multiple times. And I don't know from the work comp side of things or the insurance company side of things why that's an issue, why they won't offer it. I don't know.
All right, let me ask you, Judd, what is typically the impact of a positive drug screen post-accident on benefits or rights that a work comp client may have under Massachusetts law?
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, we don't see a lot of these. We do have alcohol tests. We do see the drug screens come up. Apparently, the insurers like to make some hay out of it. It comes down to this. It's a no-fault system at its heart. And the tie goes to the runner, and the beneficiary should always be looked at in the light most favorable to the employee. I think the judges get that. I think the legislatures get that. So if someone is under the influence or intoxicated or has some drug in their system, as long as it does not cause the injury, then it's de minimis. Could the insurer use it to attack someone's character? Maybe make them out to seem like, not trustworthy, not credible, perhaps. We would do our best shot to try to rehabilitate and make sure that isn't what's left in the judge's mind. But, as long as it isn't, we have a section for employer willful misconduct, and that's very hard to prove for a good reason. And then we have a section similarly for employee willful, almost quasi-criminal misconduct. And that would be, being intoxicated or having that positive drug screen that causes the accident. If something falls on your head and you happen to be intoxicated it's not going to matter.
So there's no presumption under the law that the employee has to overcome.
No.
Dave, how does Alabama treat a positive drug screen? I think what Judd said is very similar to what our laws are here as well. And even if there is a positive drug screen, then the injured worker still gets medical treatment paid for by work comp. They just don't get compensation benefits. And like Judd said, we would have to prove that the impairment, the intoxication had nothing to do with the accident being caused. And Judd gave a great example. Somebody sitting down, tying their shoes, and then something from 3 stories up ahead drops on his head. The fact that he might have marijuana in his system has nothing to do with how he got injured. Now, if that same person is impaired and he loses his balance and falls off a 2nd-story apartment building, then that's going to be a more problematic case for us to prove that impairment wasn't the cause of the accident.
That example that you gave was one of my first cases that I ever had as a young lawyer. Fella was doing just that. He was inside of a warehouse, and the ductwork overhead was all being changed out and modernized. He's putting on or retying his work boots, and he ultimately had, I don't know how many pounds fell on the back of his neck and just ended his working career. But the question, even though he tested positive for marijuana or something similar, the issue was not whether he was intoxicated or impaired. The issue was he in a safety concern space where he was tying and dealing with his shoes, as opposed to being somewhere else within the warehouse? As it turned out, he was actually in a space where he was permitted to do that. That's how the case turned, and we were able to secure a very nice resolution for him. But I think ultimately he might have lost the case had he been sitting and doing his shoes in an unsafe zone that was recognized, as opposed to where he was. So yeah, factually makes a huge difference when analyzing these cases.
Yeah.
Guys, the third comparison I want to make, we've already touched on it a little bit. It's how do you bring resolution to cases in Massachusetts versus the ones in Alabama? And Judd, I'll tell you, we've really got two different ways. We can try a case in court in front of a judge, a bench trial, or we can mediate a case either with a private mediator or with the Department of Labor State Ombudsman. The ombudsman for these purposes have been, I don't know if deputized is the right word, but basically been given similar authority under our law as a circuit judge to hear mediations and bring them to conclusion and sign the paperwork as if you were really in a court of law with a circuit judge. That's the two most common ways, maybe only ways. Dave, is there a third I'm not thinking of?
Ombudsman and circuit court.
No. So in Massachusetts, talk to us briefly about what's the resolution procedure or process?
Administrative law judges, they used to be called magistrates or hearing officers. Now they wear robes, and they're appointed by the judge by the governor for 6-year terms. There's about 26 administrative judges in our Commonwealth. We have 5 regional departments of industrial accidents: North, Boston, South, West, and then far west, which for us is the Berkshires. Basically the way cases resolve is a hearing, like a trial in front of the administrative judge, or I think in more than half of the cases resolved before trial in terms of a settlement, and the administrative judge would have to approve that settlement as in the best interests of the employee.
That's interesting. You said there's 26 judges. David,
yes.
Do you remember what Jack Edwards told us last month in Wyoming? They have one judge for the entire state.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And they only hear cases, I think he said, every 2 to 3 weeks for a limited period of time.
That's
but comparison from a population standpoint, there's no comparison for the state of Wyoming versus Massachusetts.
But the land mass is just so vast.
Yep, that's exactly right. But it's interesting. It's, even though it's different processes or procedures, it's very similar to the way that we handle our cases. What's not similar is our pay rates. We harp on this, unfortunately, every episode. Alabama is the lowest paying state in the country for injuries.
Lower than Mississippi.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. Okay. And our weekly comp cap is the lowest in the state. I mean, lowest in the country as well. But that's our burden.
Yeah, our max goes up every year with the 10/1/20, October 1st. They have a circular that they announce, and it usually goes up, at least over the last 10 years. I look back, about $50 a year, which is significant. So our max right now is $1,487.78. You cannot exceed that in comp. Yeah. So our minimum is 20% of that, which is $297.56. So if someone's earning less than the state minimum, their average wage is their comp rate. Our
comp rate goes up every year, like your state, and But our permanent partial disability rate is what's been set in place since 1987.
Yeah.
And that's capped at $220 a week. So if somebody can't work, you go and try their case, and they're less than 100% disabled, they're looking at $220 a week for 300 weeks. Now, minus 15% for attorney's fees. So that just went down to 187. That 220 just went to $187 a week. That's below the poverty line, well below the poverty line. And they want people to live off of that?
That's a constitutional challenge. You guys have thought to bring one, hopefully, or will be bringing one. I mean, I'll write an amicus or whatever. Never written one of those, but I would definitely want to challenge that as unconstitutional.
Judd, we'll get you an audience with our buddy Larry King pretty soon, and we'll have a good time talking about that.
Yeah.
But compared to your, what'd you say, 1,400 is the max per week, give or take?
Yes.
David, are we over $1,000 yet?
We're very close. I don't think we're over 1,000. Maybe next year we exceed 1,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's tied to the state average weekly wage, Judd. So obviously you got a higher weekly wage in Massachusetts than in Alabama. Yeah.
Well, guys, sadly, we have come to a close on this month's episode of Alabama Work Comp Today. This time flies by for us work comp nerds, but I want to thank you, Judd, for spending some time with Dave and me and running through these issues that are so vitally important to so many. They're daily issues that we deal with in our practice, and I suspect you and your dad and your fellow lawyers do as well.
It's been a real pleasure joining you two. Definitely want to wish you and your families the very merriest of holidays, Christmas, whatever you're celebrating. Just try to enjoy the remainder of this very weird, awful year. And let's hope that next year is just a much better one for all of us. I'm praying and optimistic.
Amen to that. All right, Dave, I'm giving you the closing words.
Y'all be safe. Wear a mask. Love your neighbor.
Good words